Valerie Whitcomb stood at the end of my driveway holding a foreclosure packet like it was a death certificate for the house I had been paying on for 14 years. $11,000, Jonah. You ignored every notice we sent, so don't stand there and cry about it now. She smiled when she said it, the way people smile when they think the argument ended before it started. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at the papers in her hand and asked one question. Show me the mailing receipts. That smile slid right off her face. 3 days later, I learned the association hadn't missed a notice. They had never mailed a single one. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy watching an association get caught in the trap it built. My name is Jonah Calloway. I am 48 years old, and I have lived alone in the same tan brick house on Bellwood Court in a neighborhood called Redwood Glen since I was 34. It is not a fancy place. It is one of those middle-of-the-road subdivisions where the mailboxes all match. The lawns get cut on Saturdays, and everybody knows which house has the dog that barks at delivery trucks. I run a small commercial electrical and heating business out of a work truck that has my last name painted on the door in white block letters. I am not wealthy. I am not a lawyer. What I am is a man who has spent 20-some years learning that in my line of work, the invoice and the paper trail are the only things standing between you and somebody else's version of events. That habit followed me home. Every bill I have ever paid on that house is in a gray filing cabinet in the back bedroom, sorted by year, and every statement I get electronically sits in a folder on my laptop that I back up twice a year onto a drive in the fireproof box. My association dues ran on automatic payment out of my business checking account from the first month I moved in. $95 a quarter back then, $142 a quarter by the time this all started. I had never been late. Not once in 14 years. I know that sounds like the kind of thing a man says when he is defending himself, but I could prove it, and eventually I did, line by line, on paper that nobody could argue with. Redwood Glen was quiet for the first 12 of those years. The association was run by a retired postal supervisor named Douglas, who used to walk the loop every evening with a thermos of coffee, and if he had a problem with your trash cans, he would knock on the door and mention it like a neighbor instead of mailing you a violation. Nobody loved paying dues, but nobody felt hunted either. Then Douglas moved to be closer to his daughter, the board reshuffled, and about 2 years before any of this happened, Valerie Whitcomb became president. I remember the meeting where she was voted in. She wore a charcoal blazer. She had a leather folio with tabs in it, and she thanked everyone for their confidence in a voice that sounded like she had practiced it in a mirror. Things tightened up fast after that. Violation letters started going out for things like a garden hose left coiled on a front porch or a garage door that had faded a half shade off the approved color chart. The landscaping contract got replaced with a more expensive one, the management fee went up almost 30% in a single budget cycle, and the annual reserve contribution jumped without much explanation. Most people grumbled in their driveways and paid it. I probably would have too, except I sat with the budget packet one night at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the way I would sit with a bid from a supplier, and I could not make two of the numbers agree with each other. So at the next open meeting, I raised my hand and asked about it. I asked why administrative and management costs had gone up so sharply when the scope of service in the contract read almost word for word the same as the year before. It was a plain question. I did not accuse anybody of anything, and I said as much before I asked it. Valerie let a beat of silence go by, tapped her pen twice on the table, and then said, loud enough for the whole room, "A budget spreadsheet is a little more complicated than an air conditioning, quote, Jonah." There was a scatter of laughter from the folding chairs, the nervous kind, the kind where people laugh because the room got uncomfortable and somebody had to break it. I felt my ears go warm. I said thank you and sat down. After that meeting, the letters started finding my address. Nothing severe, nothing that ever went past a courtesy notice, but they came steadily, and they came for small things. My trash cans were visible from the street on a Wednesday evening. My work truck, which is a plain white cargo van, was described in one notice as a commercial vehicle stored in a residential driveway, even though half the men on my street park pickups with company decals on them. There was one about the shade of my garage door. There was one about an extension ladder. I had leaned against the fence in my own backyard, behind a 6-foot privacy panel, which meant somebody had to be looking over it to see the thing at all. Then, on a Friday afternoon in the spring, I came home from a service call at a restaurant downtown, sweating through my shirt, and there was a business envelope in my mailbox, from a law firm I had never heard of. I remember standing at the end of the driveway thinking it was junk, some settlement notice or a solicitation. I opened it with my thumb while I walked up to the porch. The heading was in bold capitals across the top of the first page, and it stopped me dead on my own front steps. Notice of foreclosure action. Under it, in a smaller font, was my name, my address, and a number. I sat down at the kitchen table with the envelope and read the whole thing twice before I moved. The letter came from a collections attorney named Owen Rusk, representing Redwood Glen Homeowners Association, and it stated that a lien had been recorded against my property, that the account remained delinquent despite repeated written notice, and that the association had authorized the initiation of foreclosure proceedings to satisfy the debt. There was an itemized ledger attached, 3 pages of it, running down the left side in a tidy column of dates and codes. At the bottom of the 3rd page was a total, $11,086.43. My first honest thought was that they had the wrong house. That happens. I have shown up at the wrong loading dock before because somebody transposed 2 digits in a suite number. So I went down the ledger looking for the mistake, and the mistake wasn't there. It was my parcel number. It was my lot. It was my name spelled correctly, middle initial and all. Then I went the other direction and pulled up my bank records on the laptop, because if there was a real delinquency, it had to start with a missed payment, and I could not find one. Every quarterly draft had cleared. 14 years of them, unbroken, the most recent one 11 days earlier. So I went back to the ledger and read it the way I read a job cost sheet, from the first entry forward instead of from the total backward. The whole tower stood on one line item, dated more than a year earlier, a special assessment. $900 levied against every lot in the neighborhood to fund a drainage repair on the east retention pond. That was the seed. Everything below it was growth, late charge, interest, second notice fee, demand letter fee, lien preparation fee, lien recording fee, collection referral fee, attorney fee, administrative processing charge, and then more interest layered on top of the fees themselves, compounding month after month until $900 had swelled into more than $11,000. Here is the part I want to be very clear about, because it is the whole story. I had never seen that special assessment. Not the invoice, not an email, not a statement, not a single piece of paper. I went to the filing cabinet and pulled the folder for that year, and it wasn't there. I searched my email for the word assessment, for the association's name, for the management company's name, and I found dues confirmations and a newsletter about pool hours, and nothing else. I checked the spam folder, which had 4 years of garbage in it, and it was not there either. $900 had been charged against my house, had gone late, had gone to collections, had become a recorded lien, and had turned into a foreclosure, and the very first document that ever reached my hands about any of it was the one telling me I was about to lose the place. Monday morning, I called the community management office and got Maren Pike, the community manager. I had spoken to her maybe 4 times in 2 years, always politely, always about something small. I told her who I was and what I had received, and I told her I had no record of ever being billed for a special assessment. She put me on hold for a long time. When she came back, her voice had changed into something flat and careful, and she read to me off a screen. The account showed an assessment posted, then a first delinquency notice, a second notice, a final demand, a pre-lien notice, a notice of lien, and a notice of intent to foreclose. Her exact phrase was that the system reflected multiple notices mailed. I asked her a simple question. I asked her to send me copies of every one of those notices along with the date each was mailed, the address it went to, and the proof of mailing. There was a pause on the line that lasted a little too long. She said she could pull the documents. I said that was good, and that I also wanted the mailing proof specifically. The certified numbers and the receipts, because the documents themselves only showed what was written, not what was sent. That was when her tone shifted again, and this time it went from flat to nervous. She told me she would need to check with the president before releasing anything related to the collection file. I asked why a homeowner would need presidential approval to see the notices supposedly sent to his own house. She said it was procedure. I asked her whether she personally remembered those notices going out, and she said she was not able to speak to that. It was a strange sentence from a woman whose entire job was mailing letters to people, and I noticed it, and I wrote it on the legal pad word for word with the time of the call next to it. The next morning was a Saturday, and I was in the driveway at 8:15 with the hood of my truck up, checking a belt that had started to whine, when a silver sedan pulled to the curb in front of my house. Valerie got out with a folder under her arm. She was in a blazer at 8:15 on a Saturday morning. She walked halfway up the driveway and stopped where the concrete meets the apron, close enough to talk, far enough to make it clear she was not coming any closer, and she held the folder up slightly, like she wanted me to see it before she said anything. "I heard you called the office," she said. "I thought I'd save everyone some time." She told me the board had followed the process, that the account had been delinquent for more than a year, that the association had sent every notice the statute required, and that the matter was now with counsel and out of her hands. Then she said the line I had been half expecting since the meeting where she told me a budget was more complicated than an air conditioning quote. "You've had more than a year, Jonah. At some point, a person has to take responsibility for his own mail." I wiped my hands on a shop rag and told her plainly that I had not received a single notice, not one. She laughed. It was not a cruel cackle, which somehow made it worse. It was an easy, comfortable little laugh, the sound of a woman who has heard something predictable. "Of course you didn't," she said. "Nobody who doesn't pay ever gets their mail. In 14 years of doing this, I have never once had a delinquent owner tell me the letters arrived." She said it like it settled the matter. She said it like the fact that people lie meant I had to be one of them. Then she gave me advice. She suggested that if I wanted to keep the house, I should consider selling the truck, since it was a business asset and the house was a personal one, or take a loan against the equity or borrow from family. She suggested it standing in my driveway, in front of the truck that has paid for that house for 14 years, on a Saturday morning, holding the paperwork to take it from me. I have thought about that moment a lot since. I think she genuinely believed she was being helpful. I think that in her mind she was a serious person delivering a hard truth to an unserious one, and that the picture in her head of who I was had been finished a long time before she ever walked up my driveway. I did not yell. I have found that yelling gives people a story to tell about you afterward, and I had a feeling I was going to need people to be able to tell only one story about me. So I asked her a question instead. I asked how the notices were sent. She said certified mail. I asked for the tracking numbers. She said the attorney had all of that. I asked for the postal receipts, the green cards, the stamped acceptance forms, anything with a date. She shifted her weight and told me I was trying to delay the inevitable, and that the board would not be entertaining a fishing expedition from a homeowner who simply did not want to pay what he owed. That was the moment the whole thing turned over in my head. Because notice what happened there. She could tell me the amount to the penny. She could recite the schedule of notices in order. She could quote the statute, but when I asked the simplest question available, the one a shipping clerk answers 40 times a day, the one that has a 2-second answer if the answer exists, she reached for insult instead. I have never in my life had a supplier respond to, "When did it ship?" with "You're wasting everyone's time." People say that when the answer is not one they want to give. She left. I stood in the driveway with the rag in my hand for a while after her car turned the corner. If the association had really put 6 or 7 certified letters into the mail over 14 months, proving it would be the easiest part of this entire dispute. Certified mail exists for exactly that reason. It generates a receipt at the counter, an acceptance scan at the facility, a tracking history, and a delivery record. It is a system built from end to end to answer the question I had asked. So why was every single person I talked to acting like I had asked for something difficult? Monday, I stopped calling and started writing. I sent a formal written request by certified mail, and I paid the extra for return receipt, which was not lost on me, addressed to the association, the management office, the board, and the law firm. I did not argue about the money in it, not one sentence disputing whether the assessment was owed. I have learned that the fastest way to lose an argument is to have 3 of them at once. I asked for exactly 7 things and nothing else. I asked for a copy of each notice the association claimed to have sent. I asked for the date each one was placed in the mail. I asked for the address each was sent to. I asked for the certified mail article number for each. I asked for proof of mailing, meaning the postal acceptance documentation, not the internal record. I asked for the complete account ledger from the date of the assessment forward, and I asked for the board minutes or written resolution authorizing the lien and the foreclosure, along with the vote count. I dated it, signed it, kept a copy, and logged the receipt numbers on the legal pad. 9 days later, Marin sent me a response by email with an attachment that was 140 pages long. I know what that is. I have received it from general contractors who do not want you to find the change order. It is called burying a request, and the theory is that a man with a work truck and no paralegal will open a file that big, feel his stomach drop, and put it away. I made a pot of coffee, hooked the laptop to the television in the front room so the pages would be big, and went through it a page at a time with the legal pad on my knee. Valerie sent her own email an hour after Marin's, copying the whole board and the law firm. I have it printed and it is short enough to remember. She wrote that as I could see, the association maintained complete records, that the documentation spoke for itself, and that she hoped I would now stop wasting everyone's time and address my obligation like an adult. She could not resist. She had the file in front of her, and she believed it was a wall, and she wanted an audience to watch her put me on the other side of it. I typed the first article number into the postal tracking site with my coffee going cold beside me. The page loaded. It gave me a status in gray letters at the top. Label created, item has not yet arrived at post office. Underneath was a single line of history, the date the label was generated, and nothing after it. No acceptance scan. No arrival at a processing facility. No departure. No out for delivery. No delivered. Nothing at all had happened to that number, except that it had been created. I sat there and looked at it for a good long minute. Then I typed the second number. Same thing. Third number. Same thing. I did all 6, and then I did all 6 again slowly to make sure I had not transposed a digit, and then I did them a third time on my phone on a different network. Because at that point I did not trust anything. 6 numbers. 6 identical results. Every one of them proved that a shipping label had been created inside a computer. Not one of them proved that a physical envelope had ever been handed to the postal service. I want to be honest about where my head was. I did not celebrate. I understood exactly what I had and exactly what it was worth, which was less than it looked, because there is a real explanation available for a missing acceptance scan, and any competent person on the other side would reach for it immediately. Scans get missed. A clerk runs a stack through, and one does not register. It happens. If I walked into a hearing with 6 unscanned tracking numbers and nothing else, the association would say, the letters went out and the postal service simply failed to scan them, and it would be my word against a story that was not impossible. I opened the document properties. The producing application was listed, and under it, in the author field and again in the footer of the mailing log page, was a company name I had not seen anywhere in the letters themselves. Cedar Ridge Document Services. I looked them up. They were a mail fulfillment vendor about 90 miles from us, the kind of outfit that takes a data file from a management company, prints the letters, folds and stuffs them, applies postage, generates the tracking numbers, and hands the trays to the postal service in bulk. The association did not mail its own letters. A vendor did. I called them the next morning. I got a woman in client services who was courteous and completely immovable. She explained that account-level records including induction reports and postage detail belonged to the client. that she could not release anything to a third party, and that if I wanted those records, I would need to obtain them through the client or through legal process. I told her I understood, and I meant it. Then I asked her one general question that had nothing to do with my account. I asked whether the creation of a tracking number in their system meant a letter had been mailed. She said no. She explained, in the patient tone of somebody who has explained it before, that numbers are assigned when a job is generated and queued, and that a piece is not considered mailed until it is physically inducted, meaning printed, stuffed, metered, and accepted into the postal stream, at which point the acceptance scan appears. Generated and mailed, she said, are two different statuses in their system and always have been. I thanked her, hung up, and wrote one sentence on the legal pad and underlined it twice. Then I did what I had been holding off on. I sent the 6 tracking results to the association, the management office, and Owen Rusk, in writing, with a screenshot of each and a short cover note saying that none of the 6 numbers showed evidence of postal acceptance, and that I was renewing my request for proof of mailing. I expected one of 2 responses. Either somebody would come back with real receipts I had not seen, in which case I was wrong and I would pay, or somebody would go quiet and start checking. What happened instead was the thing that told me this was no longer an accident. 4 days later, I received a letter from the law firm advising that the association had instructed counsel to proceed and that a foreclosure complaint would be filed. Not a pause, not a review, not a single sentence acknowledging the tracking results. She had been handed evidence that the notices might never have gone out, and her response was to speed the machine up. That is when I understood that whatever Valerie Whitcomb was protecting, it had stopped being the association's money. That was the week I hired a lawyer. Her name was Delia Fournier, and she had a small real estate practice above a bakery on the north side of town, and I picked her because when I laid the file on her desk, she did not tell me she would fight for me. She read for 11 minutes without saying anything, then looked up and asked me whether I had the original envelope the first foreclosure notice came in. I did. It was in the cabinet with the postmark intact. She smiled a little and said that was a good sign about how I keep records, and that in a paper case the person with the better filing habit usually wins. 2 weeks later, the board called a special meeting. It was on a Tuesday evening in the clubhouse, 40-some folding chairs, a long table at the front, a coffee urn nobody was using. Word had gotten around the neighborhood by then, the way it does, and the room was fuller than I had ever seen it. I sat in the 3rd row with a manila folder on my knees. Valerie sat dead center at the table with her folio open, Marin to her left with a laptop, Elise Hartwell, the treasurer, to her right, and 2 other board members at the ends, looking like they wished they were anywhere else. She got about 6 minutes into her presentation before she came to me. She did not use my name at first. She talked about a delinquent account, about the burden that unpaid assessments place on neighbors who do pay, about the board's fiduciary duty. Then she looked directly at me over the top of her reading glasses and said, "If Mr. Calloway had spent as much time paying his bills as he has spent investigating this association, none of us would be sitting here tonight." A few heads turned toward me. She had done it again, and she had done it in front of the same room as the first time. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I said that I had one question and one exhibit, and that I would sit right back down. Then I walked to the table and laid down 6 printed pages, 1 for each tracking number, each showing the same gray line at the top. I said, "These are the 6 certified numbers your office provided me. I would like someone at this table to point to an acceptance scan on any one of them." Then I went back to my chair and sat down, because I meant it about sitting down. Valerie did not look at the pages. That is the detail I remember most clearly. She kept her eyes on the room, and she changed the subject with a smoothness that told me she had already decided how to handle this. She said the association's legal obligation was to send notices to the address of record, and that the association could not be held responsible for whether a homeowner opened his mail, read it, or acknowledged it. She said the statute did not require proof of receipt. She was correct about that last part, which is exactly why it was such a clever answer. I answered from my chair. I said, Ma'am, I didn't ask you to prove I read them. I know you can't. I'm asking you to prove you sent them." The room went quiet in a way that rooms do when everyone realizes at the same instant that a question has not been answered. Somebody's chair creaked. Marin stopped typing, and Elise Hartwell, who up to that point had been sitting, with her hands folded and her face carefully neutral, pulled the stack of pages across the table toward herself and started reading. I watched her go through them. She read the 6 tracking sheets. Then she opened the collection file in front of her and read the notices themselves. And then she looked at Marin's laptop screen, and then she asked Marin to open the document history for the account. It took maybe 40 seconds. Then Elise said, without any drama at all, "Marin, these 6 documents were all created in the system on the same afternoon." She looked up at the room. "The letters are dated across 14 months. The records say they were generated in one sitting." Delia moved on 2 fronts. She sent a records demand to the association under the statute that gives members access to association records, which covered the ledger, the collection correspondence, and the vendor invoices. And she subpoenaed Cedar Ridge Document Services for the production and induction records tied to the association's account for the 14-month window. She told me the vendor would probably comply without a fight, because vendors have no dog in these disputes, and their records are their protection. She was right. The Cedar Ridge production came back on a Thursday. Delia called me at 10 in the morning and told me to come to her office instead of talking about it on the phone. I drove over with sawdust still on my sleeves from a job. She had 3 documents laid out on the desk in a row, and she turned the first one toward me and put her finger on a single cell in a table. It was a batch summary for the association's account covering the period in question. It listed jobs received, documents generated, pieces printed, pieces metered, and pieces inducted into the postal stream. The generated column had numbers in it. Healthy numbers, hundreds of documents across the neighborhood. The printed column had numbers too for most of the batches. But for the batches containing every one of my 6 notices, the induction column read 0. Not low, not partial, 0 pieces inducted. Nothing had ever been handed to the Postal Service. The second document explained why. It was an account status report, and across the top of the relevant period was a flag in capital letters, "Account Hold." Cedar Ridge had placed the association's mailing account on hold for non-payment, not for the printing fees, which were billed monthly in arrears, but for the postage escrow, which had to be funded in advance, because the vendor pays the Postal Service up front and gets reimbursed. The association had let the postage account run dry and had not funded it for a stretch of about 17 months. During a hold, the vendor's system continued to accept jobs. It continued to generate documents. It continued to assign tracking numbers, because numbers are assigned at generation. And then it stopped. The pieces sat in a queue. They were never printed, never folded, never stuffed, never metered, never trayed, never handed across a counter. They existed as data and nothing else, which is why 6 tracking numbers said label created and would say label created until the end of time. There was no envelope for the Postal Service to scan because there had never been an envelope. Somewhere in a server 90 miles away, 6 letters to my house had been sitting in a holding queue for over a year while a lien grew on my property. The third document was the one that turned a failure into a decision. It was an email from Cedar Ridge's Client Services group, sent during the hold period, addressed to Marin Pike, and copied to the association's shared board address. It stated the account balance, the hold status, and then a sentence that Delia had highlighted in yellow. No queued documents will be released while the account remains on hold. Below, it was a count of queued items, and a note that queued jobs older than the retention window would be purged. But I was not there yet, and Delia was careful to tell me so. The email went to Marin and to a shared board address that 4 people had the password to. A shared inbox is a good place to hide. Valerie could stand up in any room and say she never opened it, that the manager handled vendor correspondence, that she had relied in good faith on what the system showed her, and that if the letters did not go out, it was a clerical failure by staff. It was a clean escape route, and I could see her taking it, because I had already watched her take the same kind of exit twice. So Delia went after the last thing. She demanded the administrator audit log for the association's account in the management software, the record of who logged in, when, and what they changed. Management platforms keep that log because their clients demand accountability from their own staff. Getting it took another 3 weeks and emotion. When it came as a spreadsheet with 900 and some rows, sorted by timestamp, with a username column on the left. Delia had filtered it down to my account before she showed me. 6 rows, clustered together, on a Tuesday evening at 17 minutes past 9, and in the user column on every one of those rows was a single name, Valerie Whitcomb. Here is what those 6 rows said. On that Tuesday evening, 3 days after Owen Rusk's office sent the association a written request asking it to confirm proof of mailing before the foreclosure complaint was filed, someone logged into the management system using the administrator credentials assigned to the president. That session opened my account. It opened the document history. And then it changed the status field on 6 documents, one after another, from generated to mailed. The timestamps were 11 seconds, 9 seconds, 14 seconds, 8 seconds, and 12 seconds apart. That is the pace of a person clicking a drop-down down a list. There were no other entries attached to those changes. No postal receipt was uploaded, no acceptance scan was attached, no vendor confirmation was linked. No postage charge was posted to the ledger, and I checked because postage on 6 certified letters would have shown up as a real expense, and it never did. 6 letters became mailed in 72 seconds because one person told a database they were. And once the status field said mailed, everything downstream worked exactly as designed. The system generated a compliance summary showing 6 notices mailed on 6 dates. The management office ran that summary and sent it to the law firm. The law firm read a certification from the association's own records and did what a collections firm does, which is proceed. Owen Rusk never lied to me. He was handed a document that said a thing had happened, and he believed his client. The whole foreclosure had been built on top of a field in a database that a woman changed one Tuesday night at 9:17. There was one more thing in the production, and Delia saved it for last the way you would. It was an internal email chain between Marin and Valerie from the same week. Marin had written first, and her message was short and worried. She wrote that Cedar Ridge had not released the batch and asked whether the notices should be resent directly from the office before anything further was filed. Valerie's reply was 2 sentences. Don't resend. The file's already with collections, and he'll pay once he understands the house is on the line. The hearing on our motion to stop the foreclosure was on a Wednesday morning in a courtroom with bad fluorescent lighting and a radiator that clanked. Owen Rusk appeared for the association. Valerie sat behind him in the first row with her folio. Marin sat 2 seats down from her and did not look at her once. Elise Hartwell was there too, in the back, on her own, which I noticed. Rusk opened the way he had to. He said the association had complied with the statutory notice requirements, that the homeowner had been notified on 6 separate occasions over a period of 14 months, that the debt was undisputed as to amount, and that the lien and the foreclosure were properly authorized. He was professional about it. He had no idea yet what was in the folder on our table, and I did not enjoy watching it happen to him as much as I thought I would. Delia went in order, and the order was the whole thing. She put up the 6 tracking records first and asked the court to note that not one showed postal acceptance. Then she put up the Cedar Ridge batch report and put the induction column on the screen, 0 pieces. Then the account hold status and the 17 months of unfunded postage. Then the vendor's email saying no queued documents would be released, with the date, next to the date of the association's certification. And then the audit log, filtered, 6 rows, 9:17, on a Tuesday, 1 name. Valerie asked to address the court and was allowed to. She said that the mailed status in the management system was an internal administrative designation, reflecting that documents had been completed and released for processing, that it had never been intended to represent physical postal induction, and that she had updated the records to reflect the completion of the association's obligation. She said it steadily. She had clearly worked on it. It was, I will give her this, the best available version of what she had done. Delia asked her 4 questions. Where is the postal receipt for any of the 6 letters? There is none. Where is the acceptance scan? There is none. Where is the postage charge on the association's ledger for 6 certified mailings? There is none. What is the vendor's induction count for those batches? There was a long pause, and then Valerie said, quietly, 0. Then Delia read the email out loud. Don't resend. The file's already with collections, and he'll pay once he understands. The house is on the line. She read it slowly, and she did not add anything to it. There is nothing you can add to a sentence like that. The courtroom got very still. Owen Rusk turned around in his chair and looked at his own client for about 4 seconds, and I watched a man's professional life rearrange itself in real time. I did not have to say anything at all. I sat there in a clean shirt with my hands on my knees, and I thought about a Saturday morning in my driveway, and a woman in a blazer telling me that this was not a filter change, and I could not fix it with what was in my toolbox. She had been so sure that the paperwork was her country, and I was a tourist in it. And in the end, she was undone by paperwork, by her own paperwork, by 6 lines in a log she probably did not know existed, generated automatically by the very system she had used to make the problem disappear. The court stopped the foreclosure. The ruling was not dramatic. It found that the association had failed to demonstrate compliance with the statutory notice requirements, that the record before it did not support the assertion that the notices had been mailed, and that the association could not proceed on the lien as constituted. The judge said the association was free to start over correctly if a valid debt existed, and that was, if you think about it, the most humiliating part for them. He did not call anyone a liar. He just told them to go back and do it the way they should have done it in the first place. Owen Rusk asked for a recess to confer with his client before we were even out of the room. I passed Valerie in the hallway on the way to the elevator. She was standing by the window with her folio held against her chest with both arms, and she was not smiling. She was not doing anything. She was just standing there while her attorney talked at her in a low voice. And for the first time since I had known her, she looked like a person who had run out of ways to make the room about somebody else. The board met in closed session that Friday. I was not there, but Elise told me most of it afterward, and the rest came out in the minutes. Elise and 2 other members moved for a full audit of my account from the assessment forward, line by line, with every charge traced to the policy that authorized it. The management company's regional director sat in. It took most of 2 evenings, and it produced a result that was worse for the association than the hearing had been. The principal was $900. That was it. That was the entire underlying obligation. A drainage assessment on a retention pond that I would have paid the week I received the invoice, because I have paid every other thing that house has ever asked of me. Everything above that number, $10,186.43 of it, had been manufactured by the collection process itself. Late charges on a bill I never got. Interest on the late charges. Fees for demand letters that were never sent. A fee for preparing a lien and a fee for recording it. A referral fee. Attorney fees. Administrative processing charges for administering a process that had not actually occurred. Valerie's first move was to put it on Marin. She told the board that the manager handled vendor relationships, that the manager was responsible for the mailing account, that the manager had failed to escalate the hold, and that the president had relied in good faith on the status shown in the system. It was a decent theory for about 4 minutes. Then Elise put the audit log on the table, turned it around, and pointed at the user column, and asked her to read the name out loud. Valerie read it. Marin spoke after that, and to her credit she told the truth without being cornered into it. She said she had flagged the hold. She said she had asked whether the notices should be resent from the office. She said she had been told not to, and she said that when the law firm asked for confirmation of mailing, the president had told her, in her words, to mark it complete and move it forward. She said she should have refused, that she had a mortgage and a job she needed, and that she had told herself the letters would go out eventually. Nobody in that room had much to say to her afterward. Elise asked the last question, and I have thought about how plainly she put it. She asked, "Did you know we hadn't mailed them?" And Valerie said, "I knew we had generated them." Elise let that sit for a second and said, "That isn't what I asked you." The silence after that ran long enough. Elise told me that somebody got up and refilled the coffee urn just to have something to do. The ending was not a movie. Nobody was arrested. Nobody was ruined. The foreclosure was withdrawn. The lien was released after the board reviewed the file and accepted that it could not stand on the notice record behind it. Every late charge, every collection charge, every attorney fee, every filing and administrative charge tied to the notice chain was reversed off my account because there was no honest way to keep charges for a process that had not happened. And then I paid the $900. I want that in this story because it matters to me. When the association sent me a proper invoice for the original assessment, dated, itemized, delivered, I wrote the check the same week and I have the receipt in the cabinet with everything else. I never wanted to escape what I owed. I owed $900 for a drainage repair on a pond 4 streets over that I have never once walked past, and that is fine. That is what living somewhere with shared property means. What I refused to do was let an association turn $900 into $11,000 and then take my house with a procedure they had never actually carried out. The board voted to remove Valerie as president at the next regular meeting. It was 3-2, which surprised me. She kept her seat as a member for the rest of her term because the bylaws made removing her from the board entirely a much longer road, and nobody had the appetite. So at the meeting after that, she sat at the far end of the table with the rest of us, instead of in the middle, with no folio, and when the agenda came around, she did not speak. I came in late that night, straight from a job, still in work clothes, and the only open seat was along the side wall. I walked past her to get to it. She was maybe 3 feet away. She did not look up. That was it. That was the whole revenge, if you want to call it that. A woman looking at the table while a man in work boots walked by, in a clubhouse that smelled like burnt coffee on an ordinary Tuesday. I have thought since that the smallness of it is exactly what made it land. Elise, who became president, read the new policies into the record that same night. Proof of mailing must be obtained and filed with every notice in every collection file, and no file advances without it. Generated may never be recorded or reported as mailed under any circumstance. Every foreclosure referral requires an independent review by a board member who is not an officer, plus a documented majority vote in open session. Every homeowner has the right to request and receive a complete notice history for their own account within 10 business days. And no officer, including the president, may modify a collection status field in the management system without a second authorized signature logged against the change. I drove home after that meeting the long way, around the loop, past the retention pond that started all of it. The house was there the way it always is, the porch light on the timer, the truck in the driveway with my name on the door, parked in the exact spot where a woman in a blazer once suggested I sell it to save my home. I went up the walk and opened the mailbox out of habit before I went inside. There was an association envelope in it. My stomach still did a small thing, 14 months of conditioning, and then I turned it over and looked. Certified. A tracking number in the window. A postage meter stamp with a date on it, 4 days earlier, an acceptance stamp from the counter. I stood on my own steps under the porch light and started laughing, out loud, alone in the dark, like a man who had lost his mind. It was a routine notice about a change in the pool key system. It was nothing. It was everything. People ask me what the lesson is, and I never have a good one. 6 tracking numbers that led nowhere. A vendor report with a 0 in the column that mattered. An email telling her nothing was going out, and another email in her own words saying not to fix it. And a log kept automatically by a system she trusted completely, showing her name in the exact second she decided a thing was true because it was convenient. That is all it was. That is all it ever needed to be. Valerie Whitcomb told me my problem was that I didn't read my mail. In the end, her problem was that she never sent it.